in honor of this week being the beginning of spring, I thought it'd be a good time to answer a question that I get asked very often. In fact, anytime that someone books me to do senior pictures, family photos, or anything along that nature, they ask what time of the day is best to take the pictures. And the answer that almost every photographer is going to give you is probably golden hour. Now, there's obviously some exceptions to that rule. It's just usually the safe time for everybody to suggest, because that's the time when really the light just looks naturally the best. Less harsh shadows, a warmer appearance in the sky. It just is a little bit more pleasing. And the shadows on people's faces, if they happen to be facing the sun, is going to be a little bit more straight on, as opposed to kind of a harsh shadow underneath the nose or underneath the chin and things like that. So it's a little bit more flattering to the features of the face. But even if you have it where the sun's behind you, which is how most people actually do it, it still looks a heck of a lot better, because it also creates some of that glow or some of that sun flare that kind of creates a little bit of dramatic appearance to your photos. Now, there are some exceptions. You know, it could be midday if you're indoor. It doesn't really matter what time of the day you're doing that, unless you're depending on some window light. Then you definitely want to make sure that you're shooting where the light's going to come in pretty strong right there. Maybe you're, creating your own light, so at that point it doesn't really matter. Or maybe you're in an area where you have a lot of shade. If you're shooting in Manhattan, New York, for example, you probably don't need to worry about golden hour, whether it be the morning or the evening version, because you have buildings on all sides of you and you could pretty much take advantage of that pretty well. Same thing if you're in nature, if you got tall trees, if you can really control how much light is hitting your subject, the time of the day won't necessarily matter, unless you're wanting some of that naturally kind of color and hue that's going to come in the sky. Golden hour is really easily defined. It's usually the first hour after sunrise, or it could be the last hour just before sunset. Now, that's technically how a lot of people define it. Some people define it by 30 minutes before sunset and then 30 minutes after sunset, where the sun is a certain elevation above or below the horizon. Same thing with the sunrise. So it really is a little bit different. On the equinoxes, for example, so first day of spring being this week, or if it happened to be the first day of fall also, that's actually when golden hour is going to kind of last the least amount of time. And why that is because that's when the sun has just a direct path to go straight down over the equator. So it's really just moving perfectly across the Earth's equator at that time. So it is a little bit shorter technically. So if you're going to measure golden hour in terms of how many degrees the sun is or below the horizon, the equinoxes, it is going to be a little bit less. And it's actually going to be less by a measurable difference. Winter, it's a little bit longer. For us here in Kansas, it's going to be a little over an hour. Same thing with summer. Summer will be a few minutes less, but still over an hour. And then during spring and fall, it'll actually be about 55 minutes. So you actually lose upwards of about 10 minutes with that golden hour if you're measuring the sun in terms of how many degrees above the horizon it actually is. And that's where it all kind of appears to be the same. So golden hour, it's great. 1 hour is actually kind of too early for a lot of it. 30 minutes is kind of the sweet spot for a lot of it. But you can get all the way to where the sun starts to go down. The only thing you have to be concerned about is how much light you're going to lose. So you have to slow your shutter down quite a bit. And because you have to do that, you got to be careful if it's windy. If you're shooting at 1/200th of a second and there's a large breeze, then you're going to have some blur with the hair as it's kind of blowing in the wind. So you kind of want to be mindful of that kind of stuff. Another thing that you kind of want to be careful on is having some of that ghosting and that lens flare that could actually come straight into the camera and cause it to appear in odd places on your subject. Sometimes you might want the sun to be perfectly over the shoulder, and that looks amazing. But depending on the design of the lens, or if you're using a hood or anything along those lines, or not using those things, then you could have like some lens flare that comes across the chest or maybe even hitting the face. So make sure you are paying attention to how your camera is shooting that. Now you can fix those things in Photoshop, but it definitely takes some more time if it's going to start interacting with detailed objects or kind of elements in your photo. Like if someone's got, a patterned shirt, or if someone You know, if it lands on their eye, that's a lot more of a pain to kind of work with those types of things. So golden hour is an amazing time. It's really the best time. And that's why really every single day of the year, you really can only count on 2 subjects to really capitalize on getting to use that golden hour. Now, one for the evening, but then the other one also for the morning, because the morning's also just as amazing, is also on the other side of the sky. So if you have a location that you really like and the sun coming up in the east is going to be more ideal, then you kind of want to work with your subject to make sure they know that the best time is probably just to go out there and actually do it first thing in the morning. And during the summer, that kind of stinks because it can get all the way down to close to 6 o'clock in the morning or even earlier, depending on where you're from. During summer, that's great because it's still a little bit warmer. But during the winter, those 6 to 7 o'clock photo shoots, they can be completely unbearable because it's going to be incredibly cold. So work with your subjects a little bit, kind of know how that's going to work. Definitely get out there and shoot with that, enjoy that. If you know that it's kind of during the harvest time, I will say, like for example, here in Kansas, during harvest, you're going to have those more gorgeous sunsets and even sunrises because of that dust that's being kicked up into the sky. It's going to block some of the light, and that's why we have really nice sunsets and sunrises here in Kansas, because we do have a lot of stuff and a lot of dirt in the air that gets kicked up. So when you're looking out over east, you know, over the ocean, you don't necessarily have that as much. Now you can have a gorgeous sunrise still quite often out there, but it's not for the same reasons really that we're having them here. Same thing with people in California, you know, with the sunsets and stuff like that. So that's my advice. That's my favorite time to really take pictures of portraits of people outside. Now, even when I do that, I still bring reflectors. I'll bring external lights, because even though that sun's right there and it looks gorgeous, well, your subject is now going to be much darker. So sometimes you have to either blast some light into their face, or you may have to put on a reflector, use a reflector, maybe have an assistant to do this so that you can add some light back to them and create a little bit of textures. Now, with cameras being raw, if you shoot with raw, you have a lot of forgiveness that you can bring up a lot of those shadows and take down a lot of those highlights, but it's still not the same than doing it as close to perfect in camera, because you are going to lose, you know, some dynamic range, and you're also going to increase the noise and that type of stuff. So if you're able to shoot it perfectly right there in camera, or at least very close to it, you're gonna have a lot more flexibility and really making that photo pop later. So that's my advice. That's why I think golden hour is the best time to take pictures. I think most every other photographer agrees with that. It can be overdone, you know, sometimes break it up a little bit, get some other stuff. Harsh shadows sometimes are good, but kind of play with it, get an idea what you think, and just kind of follow that rule. You know, get out there shooting about an hour within sunrise or sunset and see what you think. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, or if you want any other tips and tricks on what to shoot and how to shoot in photography or video, definitely let me know. I'll be more than happy to create a video on that, and hopefully you find it helpful as you start your journey into learning how to do photography. Thank you very much.